Well, the vulgarity of it surprised me. And I think he put Israel into a direct confrontation with almost all the world. That's why the seats in the General Assembly were empty. He told it like he sees it. The most important point of his speech is that under no circumstances, according to him, will there be a Palestinian state. So he made clear what we've known for a long time, but some people have denied. The war against Hamas, as he terms it, is not really a war against Hamas. It is a war against the possibility of a state of Palestine. It is a war to expunge the political rights of Palestinians once and for all. And today's speech put that very, very clearly. He didn't say, once we get rid of the terrorists, well, then we will sit down and negotiate a state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel. He said it will never happen. And he said that is the will of not only himself and his government, but also, he said, of the parliament, the Knesset in Israel, and of the Israeli people. So he took a very clear stand, which, in my view, first of all, makes clear that Israel has no possible direction for peace other than killing and war all the time. And throughout the speech, he endeavored to draw the United States again and again and again into his endless wars. He actually pointed out that Israel is engaged in 7 wars right now, and he wants the United States to be engaged in all of them. He made clear that nothing will allow a state of Palestine. And this, I think, is very important for people to understand. Israel has thrown down the gauntlet. It's not a surprise. It should not be a surprise to anybody, but it will be a surprise to some, because I still get people telling me every day up until today, oh, it's about attacking the terrorists. He's not ruling out a Palestinian state and so forth. Well, he certainly is. And the only way that Israel can have this answer that Netanyahu wants is endless war and endless mass murder. And he wants the United States to sign up for that.
Even though his absurd and disgusting claims about the events of October 7th have been totally debunked by Max Blumenthal, by Haaretz, by nearly everyone that's looked at them, he repeated that disgusting nonsense today. Chris?
Almost everything that he said in the speech was a lie. Every number that he cited, the claim that the deaths of non-combatants relative to combatants is less than 2 to 1, when it is probably about 5 to 1 at a minimum. Most of the people dead in Gaza are women and children. Children alone are 40% or more of the deaths. This man is a mass murderer. He doesn't count the lives of anybody but Israelis. And the rest for him is non-existent. It is a kind of derangement, but it is a derangement that has led to a genocide, despite what he said. By the way, of course, the UN Human Rights Commission issued a very detailed report explaining why, by law and by fact and action, this is a genocide. And then he made absolutely shockingly absurd, I would say even obscene statements about how they're protecting the Gazans by telling them to leave their homes because they're about to be bombed, and they're so good that they give them advance notice. And we know that not only have hundreds of thousands, more than a million, basically almost the entire population, been displaced by the mass destruction of every means of survival. When the Gazans have been sent to a supposedly safe place, they're bombed there as well. Everything he said was a lie about all of these facts. But the main point is that he explained very clearly the political point of view. The political point of view, as we have discussed many times, you and I, is that there will never be a Palestinian state. That will lead to resistance among people who are oppressed and suppressed and jailed for no cause, or expelled from their homes, or expropriated, or tortured, or murdered in cold blood by settlers and by IDF and others. There will never be a Palestinian state. There will then be resistance, and Israel will see to it that it overthrows every government that supports the Palestinian cause. And that's why Israel is in 7 wars, and he bragged about it. He bragged about the 7 fronts that Israel is fighting. Well, Israel's fighting everybody because what Israel is doing is monstrous, because it has no answer, because there is no politics in it other than murder and repression. And his idea since 1996 has been that Israel will assert ownership of every bit of the Palestinian territory. And when the resistance comes, it will overthrow the governments. He bragged about that as well. He bragged about overthrowing the governments in Iraq, which the U.S. poured blood for in Netanyahu's war. He bragged about overthrowing the government in Syria, which claimed hundreds of thousands of lives over many, many years. He bragged about fighting Yemen. He bragged about fighting Iraq. He called again for the overthrow of Iran. He wants nonstop war to assert his vision of complete Israeli control over Palestine. And that's what he explained today very, very clearly. Israel is a rogue state backed by one country only, by the United States of America. What we had this week was a revulsion and a rejection of everything that Netanyahu claimed this afternoon. There are now well over 150 countries that have recognized the state of Palestine, despite the extreme pressure put on by the United States that those countries don't do that. But they do it anyway because they know that's international law and that's basic morality, and it might help to save the lives of millions of people who are being murdered right now by Netanyahu and his gangster cronies. So this is what today's speech really came down to. Now, it'll be interesting. Can the United States politicians understand that they are complicit in a genocide right now every day? I'm not talking only about Trump. I'm talking about the Senate and the Congress and our cabinet members. Do they understand that it is the United States which enables the mass murder of the Palestinian people, and for what end? For Israel to assert complete control over all of Palestine and over parts of Lebanon, Syria, and who knows what else they're going to claim.
Do you think that Netanyahu plans to annex the West Bank?
Of course. Israel survives only because of the United States. The United States arms Israel. The United States finances Israel. The United States provides the veto in the UN to prevent the overwhelming majority of the world from being able to act because the U.S. uses its veto. So yes, President Trump isn't bragging. he's making a point. The U.S. can stop annexation, but I'll make another point. The U.S. can stop mass starvation of the Gazans. The U.S. can stop the mass slaughter of the Gazans. The U.S. could have stopped the complete and total destruction of the houses, the churches, the mosques, the hospitals, the water stations, the power stations, the roads, and all of the rest of the facilities that made it possible for 2 million people to live in Gaza. The United States could have stopped all of that as well. So President Trump is telling the truth, but he hasn't stopped the mass murder. And that's why history will record that the U.S. is complicit in a genocide. And I hope that for the sake of the people who are dying and for the sake of our own security and survival and for the sake of human decency, that he will say today just what he said about annexation of the West Bank, that he will not allow a continuation of mass starvation, that he will not allow a continuing destruction of the people of Gaza. And if the United States had a shred of awareness, which sometimes it seems it doesn't, in the political class I'm talking about, the United States would join every part of the world and international law and common sense and common decency and recognize a state of Palestine based on peace and the two-state solution. Trump could do that also today. So yes, this can be done today. The president is not bragging. They're not doing it because of the power of the Israel lobby. And maybe even Netanyahu said because of the tight connections of the CIA and Mossad, maybe because of Mossad and Epstein, maybe because of the campaign contributions. We don't really know why, but we do know that the overwhelming majority of the world that isn't caught up by the Israel lobby understands full well what is happening.
Is the Israel lobby in the United States strong enough to overbear what we just heard President Trump say he wouldn't allow?
It could, because we know that President Trump changes day by day. So yes, it could do that. We don't know what threats, what blackmail, what cajoling, what other tools it may have, but it could. I would not rule that out. But I want to make clear that that would be a choice of President Trump. In other words, President Trump has the power. The United States is the backing of Israel, not the other way around. And so if we actually have an America foreign policy, not an Israel foreign policy, then he will stay with what he said. And this is what his followers supposedly elected him for. It's what any American would want, which is we want the American interest, not the Israel interest, not America to be part of endless wars, which Netanyahu has pulled us into time and again, not to be part of a genocide, not to be part of a blackmail or bribery operation, not to be isolated from the rest of the world. And now we have today, I think, as clear as can be, Netanyahu says there's no path to peace other than through war, because Israel will never allow a state of Palestine. Well, the point is that if the United States changed, that too can be imposed by the world community. That's called the UN Charter. That's called Article 7 of the UN Security Council. Even the UN General Assembly will be able to find the power to do this. Netanyahu has put his country into almost total isolation, but for one remaining country, and that is our country.
Netanyahu bragged today about the 7 wars that Israel is fighting. And of course, we both know, and everybody watching us now knows that he wants to start an 8th. And you and I were invited to lunch, although we both left before the food was served, with the people that he wants to attack and kill. The president
Netanyahu also explained this, that we have a wonderful friend next door in Syria now, and I expect that we're going to make peace soon. Well, it's very simple. In 2011, and Petraeus was very much there and involved, the Obama administration decided to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad. This was done at the behest of Netanyahu. This is one of Netanyahu's many wars in which he uses the United States, uses the U.S. government, the U.S. military, the U.S. taxpayer to fight his wars. Let me just say before I get back to Syria, what is Netanyahu's intention? That Israel dominates the Middle East in power, in effective hegemony, but that it completely dominates Palestine, that basically the Palestinians are written out of history, even mass slaughtered or ethnically cleansed from Palestine. So what Netanyahu has said since 1996 is that there will never be a state of Palestine. This is what he reiterated at the UN. And we will overthrow any government that opposes us in our domination of all of Palestine. It's mind-boggling in its brutality and in its delusion. Israel, around 10 million population, wants to dominate a region of hundreds of millions of people, including by destroying the population of Palestinian Arabs in their midst, which equal the number of Israeli Jews, roughly speaking, at about 8 million people each. So this is Netanyahu's strategy, and every country that he calls a supporter of Palestine, therefore, needs to be overthrown. One of those was the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad. And in 2011, at Netanyahu's behest, Obama and Hillary Clinton launched the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad. Well, as in so many of American CIA-led misadventures, that's a soft term for it, this was 14 years of bloodshed and war, which claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and destroyed much of Syria and much of the ancient Syria, which is a heritage of all of human civilization. Well, finally, the result was that after 14 years, Israel and the United States brought a jihadist government to power, and they think it's their puppet. And maybe for the moment, it is their puppet. This is hardly a stable, legitimate government, nor a peaceful government, because we know that there is mass violence, retributive murder underway, large parts of the Syrian population at a grave risk, and new violence could explode. But this is a puppet regime entirely. And so the words of Petraeus, who gets everything wrong all the time anyway, and the words of Netanyahu were completely aligned in the last 3 days about this wonderful new government that Israel and the United States installed in Syria, and how it's going to make peace with Israel and do all these wonderful things. Absolutely astounding. Remember, Petraeus is also the one who told us that in 2023, Ukraine's counteroffensive was going to drive Ukraine to the Sea of Azov, and Russia was going to be defeated, and all the rest. The man's a walking disaster. So you can have the rank of general and be wrong on everything. And he is in that class. I've been hearing from the Iranians for a very long time, and in many, many detailed discussions that go back a long way, that Iran wants peace, it wants normalcy, it wants no nuclear weapons, it wants monitoring, but it wants its sovereignty and its protection from Israel, and Israel backed by the United States. Donald Trump did something shocking, extraordinarily disturbing, and extraordinarily debilitating of America's interest. And that was to enter into negotiations, announce an upcoming negotiation, and then bomb Iran a couple of days before that negotiation. So he did that, of course, at the behest of Netanyahu, but he sent, again, a very clear statement that the United States does not understand the idea of diplomacy. Like Netanyahu, it is interested in dropping bombs, not in actually reaching diplomatic agreements. And we talked just recently about the fact that it was Donald Trump who ripped up the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, with Iran back in 2017. So what you and I heard was the desire, the intention for peace and for a peaceful diplomatic solution to this. It could not have been put more clearly. The main point I'm making is that that's been true for a long time. From Netanyahu's point of view, anytime another side says negotiate, he aims to kill the negotiators. This is literal. I'm not being rhetorical. He kills the negotiators on the other side because his aim is not negotiation in which the rights of the Palestinian people would have to be recognized, but rather to use force and the overthrow of governments to impose Israel's will on the region.
I was very impressed with the sincerity of the president of Iran and the foreign minister. And I wish that the American officials could have heard what we heard without their Netanyahu tinted glasses that they always seem to wear.
Of course they could if they would sit down and talk.
Right.
And if they would do so honestly rather than kill the negotiators of the other side. Right. And by the way, Netanyahu's speech is filled with the bravado of having assassinated all these people all over the region. He brags about this. And this is the one who wants to get the United States into yet another war with Iran in particular. And it could happen. It all shows the absolute dire state of American politics, because a country of 340 million people has let itself be overtaken in its Middle East foreign policy by this tiny country, and to use the American military machine for the purpose of absolutely outrageous purposes of extremism and murder.
Professor Sachs, thank you very much. 3 times with you in 1 week is a joy. Once in person, of course, at this luncheon, and twice on the air. But thank you very much. Very, very informative. I know it's almost the crack of dawn where you are, but you're very gracious and generous to share your thoughts with us.
Well, first, what Trump did this past week has been given 2 very different interpretations. Honestly, I'm not sure which is right. Either of them shows a failure of leadership and an irresponsibility. One interpretation is that Trump expressed a new view that yes, as he's been advised by General Kellogg and other hardliners in the United States and by Zelensky and others, that Ukraine can win, that Russia is being defeated, that the Russian economy is in crisis. These are the things that he said. Normally, when a leader says something so straightforwardly, that's the first interpretation that comes to mind, is that that's a view that he's expressing. The other approach to this, which is the one you also alluded to, is that it's the opposite. In fact, that this was simply a smokescreen of Trump saying to the Europeans, you keep telling me you want to fight. You keep telling me that Russia is winning. Okay, great. Go at it. It's all yours. Just buy my weapons. So these are two different interpretations. I went with the first originally, listening to Trump and hearing his views, and also having the strange and unpleasant experience of standing in the General Assembly hall and seeing General Kellogg mingling among the various delegations. That I found to be rather unpleasant because I don't understand what a hardline American general is doing in the UN General Assembly other than stirring up trouble by the United States. But the second interpretation was the one actually given by many of the European leaders, or at least the media that purport to represent their views. That what Trump really said was, if you want to fight, go ahead. It's all yours. Just buy my weapons. Now, either way, we have a colossal failure of leadership and growing confusion and definitely growing risks of escalation, either deliberate or accidental. What Trump has never done from the beginning of this term is to explain anything to the American people or to the world about the U.S. position vis-a-vis this war in straightforward terms. For example, the most basic question, on what basis can this war be ended? The United States puts forward no positions. The European leaders put forward no positions other than saying Ukraine will determine that, which is an extraordinary idea, essentially saying we will do anything Ukraine says, whether it's in our interest or not, whether it makes sense or not. And of course, when I say what Ukraine says, I mean what one person says, Zelensky, who is at this point a dictator, in effect. He's ruling by martial law, and that is going to determine what Europe and the Western world do. So, to my mind, the great failure of this is that while President Putin has put on the table a very clear set of conditions for peace, he's described them as Ukraine's neutrality, and the transfer of specific territories to Russia at the as part of the peace agreement. The other side has said either nothing, or it's said no concessions of any kind, and Ukraine will remain in NATO, which is tantamount to saying, first, no negotiations. Second, the war will continue despite the massive destruction, the bloodshed, the demographic catastrophe facing Ukraine. So all of what I'm saying, Glenn, is that this past week was at best unedifying and at worst, depending on the interpretation, a dramatic escalation that could lead to a direct war between at least Europe and Russia, if not NATO and Russia in a direct sense of direct clashes and fighting outside of Ukraine into Europe and so on. The European leaders are absolutely without any honest public-facing discussion of these risks right now. We don't hear anything from the triumvirate Starmer, Macron, and Merz about the risks of World War III, about nuclear war, about the European Union and the UK becoming a battlefield. In fact, none of this is articulated. No choices are stated. No discussion is made. Of course, there is not one moment of truth expressed about the history of the conflict, how it arose, why it arose, how it could be diffused. Not one single word. And this past week at the UN was all the more shocking for this. Trump's speech was an incoherent rant of lies from beginning to end on every possible range of issues, by the way. The discussion, this supposed turnabout by Trump, also unexplained. The puerile insulting of Russia as a paper tiger and so on, walked back after the fact, was absolutely against the service of peace or any kind of solution. In other words, this was a week devoid of grown-up behavior, of responsibility, of any movement towards peace. And we're just talking about Ukraine, because we could talk in the same way about Netanyahu and the war in the Middle East. Every single thing that I've just said applies to Netanyahu's vile and loathsome address that he gave to the General Assembly, which was an address of hate and continued war. So not a good week for diplomacy. The leaders don't engage in real discussion. They do not debate this in public. They don't express their views. And, okay, with me, they don't have to, but they don't take on any kind of discussion. One just walked away when I started to make these points. We had an exchange of pleasantries. I expressed the worry about the direction, and I was told that I was barking up the wrong tree. This is not the way that one should behave to keep this world safe. I think what's most worrying for me is the ever-present fear that I have that some accident is going to quickly spiral out of control. What we have are two sides that are, well, especially, I would say, the Western side, yelling hatred towards Russia, an absolutely astounding, vulgar, crass Russophobia. And I call it that because it's not an attempt at an analytical explanation of what's happening. It's completely dishonest from a historical point of view. It glosses over every single fact that led us to this war, but it's hate speech nonstop. And Trump participated in that. And it is with all the claims of these provocations and all the rest, and the open discussion this week about shooting down Russian planes, the kind of blind rage that can lead to an event, that leads to another event, that leads to another event, with these this hatred and this vituperation already stoked. And then because these leaders are able to command missile systems. They don't need to ask their publics for approval, of which the publics absolutely do not approve of what is happening right now. A devastating war could soon befall us. And if this seems just kind of being afraid of the rhetoric and so forth, how many wars start with an incident, with an insult, with an accidental or false flag event that triggers a spiral rapidly of escalation? A large number. World War I, the war that destroyed every hope for peace for the next century in its way, started, of course, with an assassination by some young kids of the Archduke of the Habsburg Empire. But one can name countless such cases. And this is what we are walking along in this abyss. We're right at the edge of terrible accidents happening without diplomacy, without honesty, without reflection, without maturity, without consistency, without guardrails. And we continue to come closer and closer to the edge.
I think that the greatest threat at the moment is the assumption or delusion of escalation control, that we can continue to escalate rhetoric, actions, but still be able to bring it down when we want to. I think this miscalculation is just a disaster waiting to happen. And we see now that the Russian Oreshnik missiles are heading to Belarus because, again, they see this as a real threat. But I did want to shift a bit towards the Middle East, because you had the opportunity there at the UN to speak with the Iranian president. How are they assessing the information, the situation? Because it does seem, at least from my viewpoint, that we might be heading towards yet another war with Iran, but this time it will probably play out very differently and take on a whole new level of violence. I'm hoping I'm just a very pessimistic human being, but what were your impressions from this meeting with Iran's president?
Well, I met this year in a group again with President Pezeshkian, as I had last year, and on both occasions the president spoke eloquently for peace. And he spoke as a medical doctor, as a surgeon, as a healer, and as someone who was looking for diplomacy and for peace. And it's not only extraordinarily measured, but extraordinarily pacific in the rhetoric. No threats. Actually, one felt very sad because one knew, and I felt as I was listening to him, that we can hear the hatred coming from Israel. We heard it from Netanyahu, and I think a very high likelihood that Israel will try to attack again to bring down the Iranian government. But there was no growling by the Iranian side saying if they do this and that, or it was all a talk about the need for a peaceful way out. Yet, unfortunately, in our world right now, if you talk in that way, the other side, which is filled with loathing, detects weakness. And I think that what we heard from Netanyahu was very clear. In his demented mind, and he's really, in my view, an extraordinarily, perhaps the most extraordinarily dangerous person on the whole planet. In his mind, all evil goes back to Iran. Let me just add a couple of points, if I might. the vast majority of speeches at the UN from all over the world were actually uplifting, calling for peace, calling for cooperation, calling for an effective United Nations. We're seeing a few countries hijack the international system. We're not seeing the end of the international system or its support all over the world. I sat through lots of speeches. I met with lots of leaders. The vast majority of the world does not behave like the United States and Israel and Germany and the UK. This is really important to understand. China shows a phenomenal responsibility compared to what we've been discussing in the past few minutes. And China talked about its commitments to climate safety, to environmental safety, something that Trump completely and fallaciously abandoned at the General Assembly, calling it the whole climate issue a total hoax and so forth, when we see environmental destruction all around us. The world is not losing its sense of the need for shared actions for peace and for other common interests, to protect the oceans or to protect the common areas of our world. What it's seeing is that, unfortunately, the United States has completely lost its way, because in its delusion it tried to and tries to maintain its hegemony, which it no longer has, but it flails about trying to somehow defend its prerogatives and act as if it runs the show, which it doesn't do at all. But it uses military means for these purposes and makes the world very dangerous. So honestly, I didn't feel that it was a collapse of the United Nations. I felt more that it is a collapse of the United States. The quality of governance is appalling. Trump is an ignoramus. He's a fool. And you listen to him for 5 minutes and you know that he understands and knows nothing except nastiness. But you look at his whole team around him. This is a team of the most rank amateurism imaginable. Amateurism even dignifies it in a way. These are people just playing with words, playing with fire, playing games, making claims, changing them the next hour. It's a kind of incoherence. So, what do I take away from all of this? Not to give up on the possibilities of peace and actual justice even, and an international order of the UN Charter, but actually to see if the vast majority of the world, which speaks in the UN General Assembly, can use its will, which outnumbers the United States vastly, to push the United States and these few much smaller European powers back into some sense of responsibility and away from their delusions of grandeur. So I don't think we should give up on this. I think what we heard was some extraordinarily weird rhetoric, mainly from the U.S. and Israel, also from the UK, which never makes sense now because its delusions are even grander. Its empire was bigger and its delusions are even grander after losing that empire. But it's a few countries that are completely out of line, with the spirit of the times, which is for peace and problem solving. And there was a lot of the latter expressed at the UN.